Welcome to Behind the Headlines. I'm Marty Radovanic. Thanks for being here. This episode is personal in a lot of ways because we're going to take a look back from a different perspective of an event that we are marking this week, which is the 24th anniversary of the attack of September 11th. And in particular, this episode is about the crash, downing, we'll figure that out in a bit here, of Flight 93 in a strip mine just outside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And I am pleased to share this platform today with a former colleague who just reminded me how long ago we last spoke in person, which was literally the day he left a former employer of both of us. So he's making me feel much older than I already am, which is difficult to do because when you're my age, you feel it every day. But we want to welcome Jon Meyer, who, I don't know, Jon, what do I call you? Anchor, reporter, dad, husband. Am I missing any other titles?
I guess I could go through the checklist. I think you got them all there.
Okay.
John good to see you, Marty.
It's good to see you, but John works at WNEP in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, that television market. But John and I worked together at WTAJ in Johnstown, and we were working the morning of September 11th, 2001. Now, John was already in the office, had been in the office, and we'll get to the particulars in a second. And so he was already at work. I was at home when I got a phone call from my wife who said, "Are you watching the Today Show?" And because of me being who I am, and you'll appreciate this, John, I said, "Right. How often do I watch the Today Show?" Which wasn't a frequent thing of mine. She goes, "Well, you should put it on because a plane went into the World Trade Center." So that's how my day starts. Your day starts as a normal, everyday, I'm a reporter. Were you working with JD that day? Was he your photographer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
JD Kirkpatrick, the late JD, one of the coolest people I ever met in my entire life. Definitely a man that walked to the beat of his own drum. And so you guys are going in, you go in, you get in the car, you're out on an assignment, and then tell me what happens.
It played out here. I'll just step back to it because you brought up the Today Show. So I had the normal shift as a reporter to go into work around 9.
Right.
And I also was watching the Today Show right before I left for work, and I saw what had played out in New York. And just as I was leaving for work, I saw what played out in Washington. I walked into the WJAC newsroom, and immediately the scanner was talking about a plane that was missing and believed to be heading towards Johnstown. And the first response from most of the people in the newsroom were, what's going on here?
Right.
And so one of our reporters and her photographer, they were dispatched to the airport in Johnstown. JD and I were in the newsroom listening to the scanner calls. And next thing you know, the scanner starts talking about a plane heading towards past Johnstown. Then the phones start ringing. People see this low-flying plane near their house. And then the calls are, a plane just crashed near where we live in Somerset, in Shanksville, in Stuystown, all the different places they were calling us. Right. There was a big explosion. This plane was so low. So JD and I jumped in the news van and away we went. And off we went to Shanksville.
So you would have arrived literally as this event is unfolding. And you really didn't know where you were going, though, right? If you're in an area, and I'm trying to replay it in my mind, you would have gotten on Route 30 because that's how you would have, at least that's the way I think you probably would have ended up going. I don't know. Was that the way you guys ended up? Do you remember?
So, yeah, we left WJC down Route 219
right.
and got on Route 30. And as soon as we were on 219, state troopers were just flying by us.
So it's easy to figure out.
And they were all getting off at Route 30. We got off at Route 30. We're heading east on 30. Fire trucks are flying by us as we're going out 30. And we got out to a spot along 30 that a lot of people that are in that area will be familiar with, where was Highland Tank,
right.
a big business along
yep.
there. And people were waving the firefighters down that road. And JD, of course, you brought out absolute legend in Johnstown, Altoona that a lot of people probably don't know, but he was one of the best news gatherers there's ever been in that market. Probably.
And they would have known his work. I guarantee you they would have known his work.
They would know his work. And he knew, based on the scanner calls, based on where the vehicles were going, he knew where he was going. And so we just were following these fire trucks right to where we went. As soon as they said Highland Tank on the scanner, JD knew where we were going.
Yep.
And so next thing you know, we're following these fire trucks over a hill, and we're in the middle of just this big field. JD told me this is an old strip mine.
Yep.
And we park along this dirt road because fire trucks are starting to park. And he said to me, Johnny, you go along and see what's going on. I got to get my gear. So I ran up over this little knoll, and I come up over the knoll, and there's that field in front of me. And the whole time, JD and I are talking about this plane that we're going to see, a plane wreckage when we get there.
Right.
And he's saying, and I agreed, I'm a kid reporter at this point, 24 years old.
Yep.
And he was saying, if we get there and there's a big plane that's wrecked, we have to help the people first.
That's JD.
And then cover the news.
That's JD.
And so in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm going to come over this hill and there's going to be a big plane crashed in this field. And then what are we going to have to do? And I got over the field and there was no big plane. There's just a growing group of firefighters and state police at the far edge of the field next to some woods. And I just see some smoke coming from there. So I ran across the field. And next thing I knew, I was standing right where they were, right next to this big crater in the ground. That I see the crater you're showing on the field. I stood right next to that and was looking down into that crater. And I asked one of the firefighters next to me, where's the plane? And he just shrugged as if we don't know. And that was what we would learn later, is that Flight 93 came after it had flipped over in that fight on board. That plane went straight into the ground.
Right.
It was an old strip mine, so they figured there was at least 30 to 60 feet of loose soil, and it just plowed into there and buried itself. So it was, all of a sudden, I was just standing right there. And the thing about that morning is that as we were driving out to the scene, JD and I couldn't grasp that we had seen what had happened in New York. We had seen what had happened in Washington. If a plane was crashing that same morning near Somerset, planes are just going to fall from the sky that day, is what we're thinking as we're going out there. How could a plane crash in Pennsylvania where there had been such high prominent locations before that?
Yeah,
but,
what were they doing near Shanksville, Pennsylvania?
How's there a plane crashing here?
It can't. Yeah.
Because, of course, we didn't know the story at all at that point, except that planes are crashing into things, and now one has crashed into this field in Somerset County.
Let me interrupt for just a second. I had gotten a phone call from the office to come in. At the time, I was the main anchor, so, we need you in here. Okay, fine. I'm still not sure why I decided to go down the Route 56 bypass from my house. There were other ways to get. I don't know if there was road construction. For some reason, I went downtown to get on Monaco Boulevard. You're familiar, to go back up and to go to JC. And as I get down to the bottom of the bypass and I'm getting off, there's fire trucks and police cars and ambulances that are racing up the bypass towards Richland. So I don't know what's going on. I have no idea that there's a plane in Pennsylvania at this point. I just know what happened in Washington and in New York, and they need me at the station. So I call in, and if you remember, our standby general manager, Mark Barish, because we had just been purchased by Cox, and Mark was like acting as our general manager. And I call into the newsroom, and he answers the phone, which struck me as odd because then I realized he was in charge of what was going on in the newsroom. He had just kind of moved the news director aside. Mark was thinking, I'm Pittsburgh, I know these, whatever, So, and I call, and I get him on the phone, and I said, listen, I don't know what's going on. He said, well, here's what you need to know. And he starts to tell me about a 757 with a bomb on board headed for the Johnstown airport. We need you in here as quick as you can get here, but you cannot tell anybody what I just told you, because that's information being shared by federal and state authorities with us, and we can't reveal that. Now, at that moment, as I'm sitting in my car, I'm starting to go up Monaco Boulevard. My wife is working at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, which is a literal stone's throw from the airport. My son is working for the American Heart Association in an office building in Richland Township, which is a stone throw from the airport. And my daughter is working at St. Francis University in Loretto, while certainly not close by as you drive or walk, but in the air, not far, not knowing at this point. And I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do if I can't call my wife and tell her what I'm not supposed to tell her, because what do I tell her then?
Good point.
So I don't say
Yeah.
anything because I can't. I don't call anybody, but I'm like, all this emotion and going through my head, and I'm thinking of my family. I'm not thinking about anything else. And I get into the station and I go up into the newsroom. I forget who met me there, and I ask, and they tell me that the plane crashed in Shanksville. And I've always regretted this thought, but I understand why it happened. I was relieved. And I mean no disrespect to the hardy souls who were on board that plane, but my family was safe. So
it was just the natural dad-husband reaction.
Sure, because you don't know. At that point, we had no idea of the magnitude of what was going on that day. And, so they say, well, you got to go on the air. We're going to do local cut-ins during NBC coverage. Okay, fine. What are we doing? We'll tell you. So that was literally the way the whole day went. And I can remember one of the first things we did when you guys had established a live shot was me talking to you and saying, he's the first reporter, and you looked into that hole. And I remember thinking, you like being just incredulous that you looked into the hole and couldn't see anything. So I can only imagine that was on the minds of all the first responders at the time as well. That had to be so bizarre.
And that was the thing, is that the reporter's job when you get on the scene is ask all of the first responders what happened here.
Exactly.
And no one had an answer.
No one knew.
Everyone had a dazed look on their face. And it's interesting because I had run across the field, and remember JD, the photographer, was getting his gear. He didn't make it to the hole because just in that amount of time, a couple minutes,
they closed it off.
The state police started to set up a perimeter.
Right.
And they saw him with a camera, a visual cue, the media's here, and they stopped him halfway across the field.
Right.
That's why there's no video WJC got, WTAJ got, any of the stations got right close to the crater.
Right.
And the reality is then I didn't have a phone with me that was going to take video of what I was seeing.
Nope.
And so all the video you see is from far away, or the helicopter video you're showing there from later. But that dazed feeling from all the first responders was just so remarkable.
Did you?
And here I am, right next to it. And I knew I don't have long to be here. So I knew they wouldn't let me just roam around. I'm 6'6".
Yeah, you're not hard. You can't hide.
I was in a white dress shirt and tie. I stood out like a sore thumb there.
Yeah.
So I went up on a little knoll that was right near there, and I thought I got to write down what I'm seeing.
Yep.
And I wrote my notebook just what I was seeing. And as I was doing that, 3 state troopers came up to me nicely, but said, "You have got to get out of here right now."
Sure.
And they escorted me back across the field to where JD was. We did a couple interviews with first witnesses that had been working at the junkyard that was right there.
Yep.
And talked to them about what they saw. So they told us how this plane came in low, flipped over, and went into the ground. That was when that was the actual first bits of information that we got about this plane. And they said it was big. It was a passenger plane. And you mentioned about that, you talking to me, the first live report, and I believe the first live images of this scene on TV.
Yep.
JD put up the mast of the live truck. So one of those big towers that goes up in the air. And there was a camera on it. And he said, "I'm just going to put this up live. You talk to Marty about what you saw.
Yep.
And we'll show this image." And you and I just talked back and forth about what I saw. I was on the phone, I think, for that live report.
I think for that one you were.
I grabbed my notebook to read some of my notes, and there was no words on the notebook. It was just all scribbles. I was that overwhelmed with where I was standing, what I was seeing, that I didn't even write words, and I thought I was taking notes about what was going on.
24.
But yeah, we did that first report, and then minutes after that, the state troopers surrounded us again and said, "You have got to get out of here." And someone was near us that said, "I know this old strip mine. Come with us." And we went up to where there was these old drag lines on top of a hill, still having the field in the background. And then we did some more live reports with you where I was able to, be on camera and describe what I was going on. And I remember the first thing I said to you live on TV when I was on camera is, "Marty, the only way to describe this is haunting."
Yeah.
And I can, it's giving me chills right now, actually, to look down at the camera and see you in a box and me in a box and think of me saying that, because that live report has stuck with me the rest of my life. is standing there with that scene behind us on the biggest day of history in my life.
Yep.
And reporting on that, standing right there, it was just incredible.
And no one that wasn't there, if you've ever been there, and I tell this to people who are going to the National Memorial, that the National Park Service has done such a wonderful job recreating. But at that time, it's an abandoned strip mine. It's a big open field. The wind blows all the time, and it was an area that just was different than anywhere else that you would be. There was this feeling even before the plane crashed. If you stood there, it was just a slice out of something else. That somebody had dropped in there, and then obviously it's still that way today. By the way, I mean, you go there, the wind blows all the time. I wasn't there that long
all
ago.
the time.
Yeah.
I've been a bunch since.
And
if I go to Pittsburgh or anything, we stop there.
You stop,
on the way.
right? And I try to tell people, you got to go, you got to go, you got to go. We didn't understand the magnitude because at that moment we know we're part of a national story. We don't have any idea what that national story is going to turn into. And we did, and this is why I was so proud of the work that the entire crew did, but especially you and JD, because our job is to be the eyes and ears of the people who are watching. That's what television news is supposed to do. We're not supposed to be the story. We're supposed to be relaying the story. And you guys did such a phenomenal job. And then, as the hours became more and more, and Governor Ridge flew in, and there was all this other stuff that's going on out there, and we were there for it seems like months, but from doing live broadcasts and everything, and the enormity of what was happening. But the fact was, you could go to a gas station in Shanksville, or you could go to the elementary school, and those kids have been interviewed before. It was a small slice of Americana that suddenly was involved. It was like the center of in a uniquely American story, because I don't think there was anybody else on this planet that would have had the same impact as the people on that plane, Todd Beamer and the rest of them, for doing what they did at that moment, because it was what makes this country so unique. At least that's the impression I've carried my whole life. And it wasn't just reading about it. And I know you've been in a book, and it wasn't just reading about the story. It was feeling it. It was talking. It was reaching out. It was touching people, those first responders. I'll never forget talking to Wally Miller, who was the Somerset County coroner, and he's telling me in those first hours, and this is a little tough, so if you've got young people watching, this may be hard to hear, but he was talking about body parts falling from those trees that are just beyond the crash site, and the kinds of things that these first responders had to deal with. But it was so unique to me. It was like it could only happen in this country, where the people on board that plane would have done what they did. And I don't know about how you felt, but I remember thinking the whole time, I've got to pay tribute to these people. I've got to be very careful on how I present this, because these people took their lives for me, for Jon Meyer, for JD, for the people for the kids in that elementary school. They gave up their lives. And it just changed my whole outlook. And it will forever be that way. At least that's the way. I don't know how you feel about it, but that's always been the thing to me, that it was so unique to America.
You were describing your feelings are my exact feelings. And it's interesting, the progression of that day is that we knew the plane had crashed. It wasn't too long after that we were able to confirm from Westmoreland County 911 that they had taken a call from on board that plane.
Right.
And the passenger on the plane had said, "We've been hijacked." So then we knew that was part of this overall story.
Right.
Then we would learn, of course, that all those calls came from the plane, and they were going to do something about it, that there was a fight on board.
Yeah.
And so then it went from covering a plane crash to covering the first victory in the battle over terrorism.
Yep.
And I have said it since. It was the honor of my life to be able to tell that story and get to know some of the victims' families, the Wally Miller, the first responders of Shanksville and Somerset County, that really they took that upon themselves with such pride.
Yes.
To make sure those victims and their families were honored. It was incredible to see that. And that surrounding community too was just, the support was amazing. And so I'll never forget the one day, this was within the first week, when the first round of family members came
Yeah.
to the crash site.
Right.
And the buses were coming in, and there was a little media staging area, and the state police had started to line the route where they were going to go. And then we as reporters just stood almost in salute as well as the buses went by. And to see those people on board that bus and think about what they'd been through and what their loved ones had done. Because by then we knew this plane was destined to do something so much worse.
Right.
And they stopped that. And then after the family had visited the crash site, we were allowed to go and look at the little memorial they had created to their loved ones. And I was reading some of the messages that were left, and then it just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Yep.
And there were messages to dear son, daddy, things like that. And it just, that was the wave of that. I have to dedicate everything I have to making sure this story is told perfectly.
Yeah, I can remember that feeling of being, and I was an on-air anchor, which basically meant when I was on, we didn't script it because we didn't know. It was a story that was just developing. And I remember thinking to myself, now be temperate, be respectful, don't, it's part of the way I've always done my job. I don't try to glorify anything as saying, ooh, look what we have. It wasn't that at all, but it was to honor those people on board that plane. And I've always thought, and I wonder how you think about it, we've only got a few minutes left, but I've always thought, as I said earlier, this couldn't have happened anywhere else with the same impact. It had to happen in that little part of Somerset County because that's America. That's who we are.
Absolutely. You hate to think that this happened where it had to happen, but it did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was incredible. And the fact that plane went down in a really rural area in a field, it didn't hit a school, it didn't hit houses.
Right.
It just was fascinating that could play out that way.
You know, whether you believe in other things, I have a very strong faith. There was a hand involved there because it could have been so much. They weren't that far by air. Was it Sipesville Elementary in Shanksville? I can't remember the name of the school, but the elementary school was not that far. I mean,
no, it would have been seconds.
Yeah,
seconds difference.
And so you think
if the plane was going 300, 400 miles an hour,
and you know, when people said, well, and when all the stuff started with, well, you know, the conspiracy theorists, and they say it was shot down. Well, they wouldn't have. I don't know how they would have shot it down, and that would have made the plane invert like it did and fly upside down before it went nose first into the ground. But it's such a part of where it happened, is such a part of that story. And those of us that were there, those of us that stood on that field, and you can go back today, and the feeling is. It
all comes back.
And, you know, I have to tell you, the first anniversary, it was a cold, windy, cloudy morning.
I remember it very well.
It was terrible. It was cold. It was rotten. And I'm walking, and they started doing that was the first time they rang the bell and did the victims' names. Mm-hmm. And it was a very low cloud deck. And I hear a plane above the cloud deck. And I stopped. And because I had said to my family, I'd said goodbye that morning, and they like, hey, in case I don't come back. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, if they really wanted to make an explode, make a statement here, they'd come back because President Bush is going to be there for President Clinton's going to be, there's going to be a lot of people there. And I hear that.
You and I talked about that that morning.
I hear that plane and I froze and I thought, this is it. I really, truly thought. And you know what? It didn't bother. It was like a calm came over me. And I guess I never really went beyond it, but I guess that was something within me saying, well, this would be a great place to go if you were going to go because you'd be part of this phenomena of honoring the American spirit with people, everyday people who were just trying to get somewhere on a plane, but did something that will forever be crystallized as the power of people who live in a free society and will do anything to protect themselves. And it just, to me, to this day, I got that 1 minute cue, John, you understand what that means, but it was one of those moments. So I want to finish by saying, when you get as old as I am and you have grandchildren, what do you think you would tell them if they said, Pap, we were in school today, we were talking about 9/11. Tell me what you remember. You got to
I
do it in
would
about
sit them
30.
down and I would tell
You
the
got
whole
about
story.
30 seconds, buddy. You got 30 seconds.
I've told
Sorry.
my kids the whole story. I sit down and tell them everything I experienced and what it meant to me that day. And just to look on my own kids who are still pretty young and just of awe of what I saw.
Yeah.
It's a story that needs to be told over and over. The hardest decision of my life was to leave WJAC and leave Johnstown, Altoona, and leave Shanksville behind career-wise because I felt such a connection there. But I still find the most peace of my life is to go sit in that field and sort through my thoughts.
I've always thought
that
I was blessed to be a part of that.
I agree 100%, Marty.
Jon Meyer, WNEP, got a cushy job. He gets up in the morning, doesn't do anything, sits in a chair, and he's home by 11:30. I envy you for that. I do miss working with you, and I'm glad that you found peace and contentment and happiness where you are. And if some old guy told you that's what you should look for, he must be a pretty smart dude.
You gave me some great advice a long time ago, and it has been great ever since.
Jon,
thanks, Marty.
Thank you, sir. And thanks for sharing a unique story. Jon Meyer, WNEP. Thank you for watching Behind the Headlines, and thanks to Ryan, who's at the controls over there making us look better than we deserve. We'll see you next time.